series of lectures is going to be a little bit different than the one that Rabbi Mann did. Rabbi Mann was very much into discussing various issues and how the rabbis were battling back and forth. A lot of what I'm going to be teaching are various agadot. So I'm going to get into this in a second, what that means, as soon as I hear Freda.
When you talk about the Daf Yomi,
Okay.
is it from these teachings?
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll talk about Daf Yomi in a second. And there was something else I wanted to mention. What was it? I'll get to it in a second when it comes back to me. Okay, so let's do the 5 minute up to date on how we get to this point. I'm going to do an introduction to the Talmud. Do I need to do that very briefly on where the Talmud comes from? I'm just going to do the review. It's always helpful. It's always helpful to do it. Okay, so 3,488 years ago, the Torah is given. Not 89, but 88, according to people who
were there.
Yeah. Actually, that's actually based on what we're going to read tonight. That will be closer to truth than you may have thought. So, okay. So in the year 3488, so to speak,
Yes.
The Torah is given on Mount Sinai, so say those who measure these things. Now, we say that there were two Torahs that were given. One was the written. So here I am. I've got the written in my hand. The written is, what do I got? The written, the Ten Commandments, right? The laws that we know of, the laws that we read in the Torah. We have mitzvot. How many mitzvot, according to the rabbis? 613. Some argue more, some argue less, but we basically, somebody just went and said, how many times are we told what to do or what not to do, and came up with a figure of 613. And then we get into something what we call the oral tradition. The oral tradition, as we always talk about, is that we know the things that we're supposed to do or not do, but we have lots of questions. It's like your kid asking you, "What if?" And if you told me that I have to be in by 9 o'clock, but what happens if the bus breaks down, or what happens if the LIE is back? So we have oral traditions. It's said that when Moses dies, he takes with him. He's up on Har Sinai. He's up on the mountain. And he's there for how long? How long is he up on the mountain? 40 days. Why? And by the way, why 40? It shows 40. 40 in general shows completion of a cycle, right? How many 40s else do we have? We don't know the flood, right? How many 40 years in the desert? Right. So generally, it's the Torah's way, the storytelling way of saying to us that there was it's a completion of an era or of a cycle. And then we have the oral tradition, which gets passed from generation to generation. Your bubbies and Zadis and bubbies and pass things on to you. So the ones that I generally use are, it says in the Torah that you should put a mezuzah on your doorposts. I have no idea what a mezuzah is based on what I'm reading in we know, because we've seen a mezuzah on the door, but I don't know what that means. I don't know what goes in it. I don't know how to hang it, left, right, center, straight up, sideways, whatever it is. So these traditions were passed around from generation to generation, and we go through a period up to, let's just say around about 200 BCE or so, 500 to 200 BCE, where we start to write down and have open discussions about some of these laws. So I just want to turn you to the third of last page, and I apologize that this is going to be a little bit all over the place. I tried to write these down You notice the little box on the bottom left-hand side of the third of last page where it says rabbinical eras? Everybody caught that? Where it says Tanaim, third of last page?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a nice little bar there which gives you an idea of the tradition. So for example, I was right the first time. Around the time of the temple, what would we say 200 BCE? It's almost around the time of, what events were going on at the time? Do you think?
Who remembers?
I remember. It's hard to remember.
Roman Empire.
Almost a Roman Empire. Almost the time of Hanukkah, which is around 178 BCE, around that time. We have guys called the Zugot. Anybody know what a Zug is? A Zug is buddies or partners. For example, if you're in a non-conventional gender relationship, you say, this is my Zug, this is my partner. So examples of Zugot, if you look on the top of the page, look on the bottom, number 6, Hillel and Shammai. One takes on the president, basically, of the Nasi, the president of the country, and the other one basically takes care of, he's the head of the judiciary. So we have Zugot, right? I'm just going to go into this little thing here. And then we have Tanaim, who are rabbis, who start assembling and articulating the law. And something happens, we have a midrash that starts to be written down. We have stories and interpretations.
When is the midrash?
Midrash comes prior to the Mishnah. That's all we know. Let's go back into BCE. I would guesstimate, and I'm being taped, so I'm being careful that I don't get this wrong by 50 years. But generally, it's the period around about 200 BCE, right, to the coming down of the Mishnah. What happens in the year 70 CE? We've been through this a number of times. 70 CE, Rome wakes up one day and says, time to knock down the temple. The rabbis say, as they say, of course in perfect Yiddish, Oi Gewalt, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? We have no place to do our sacrifices. We have no place to do our transmission. Thank you. Our transmission of the holy law, and there is a mad scramble, and this is my interpretation, to write down all of the laws as quickly as possible. Otherwise, what do we have? How do we know what to do? Because if all of you we're meeting together where we're going to decide how to daven Mariv, and if we all split in 10 different countries, who's going to say what we're supposed to do, and we assimilate, and that's it. So what happens is that there's a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. We're going to do 2 tracts of Talmud today. Every week I'm going to try to do 2 tracts. And these are going to be stories that add to our understanding of Talmud and tradition. These are going to be less about law, which Rabbi Mann was doing, and I'm going to do more Agadah. Right? Well, do you know what Agadah? What's it sound like? Agadah, which means to tell the story. These are stories that we are given, which enlighten us with how the rabbis wanted us to act, but they're told through stories. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he's, and you'll notice on your little bar chart there, see where it says Tanaim? These are the law writers, the Tanaim. There was also a group of people called also the Tanaim, and they were sort of like the human tape recorders. And there's evidence that there was, for example, when someone has something that they feel sorry for, they will give the proper sacrifice, and the sacrifice is as follows. And these were almost like these were human tape recorders and that's one of the ways that we got actually the law down through generation to generation. What happens if you don't have Carl the human tape recorder to tell you the proper procedure? Then you have to write this down, otherwise we're finished. Okay? So I'm going to show you a copy here, and this would be, and I have a small copy and I have a large copy, but these are the laws. It's in small print.
Who can read that?
Not me, that's why I have a bigger copy. And you notice when we go Echad Miyodei Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Sidrei, Seder, the order of the Mishnah. How many books do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 5 books of the Torah, 4 mothers, 3 fathers, 2, 6 orders of the Mishnah. That's why you say that on Echad Miyodei. And you have, I'm going to take you back into your little sections here and go to page 3. Not very well reproduced. But you notice that these are the different subcategories, all the laws that you can think of that were on the minds of the rabbis, and the rabbis is Chazal, that's the name of the rabbis of blessed memory. The word we use is either the rabbis or Chazal. The Chachamim, may they rest in peace. The wise men, may they rest in peace. And if you look at on the top of the page, we have 6 categories. Seeds, festival, see on the top? Women, important. All the laws of cleanliness and damages, which is the legal system. Everybody with me? No. Holies, all the important things and the different holidays that you're supposed to stay at, and purities, and how do we keep clean and free of impurities. So these are the 6 orders, and this is what we find. If I was just to look in here, I would just have a compilation of the laws that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the Prince, we'll get to him in a few minutes, he compiled 200 CE. Wonderful. We have all of these laws, and although we didn't have bookkeepers, or we didn't have presses in those days, we still had the human tape recorders, we still had the people that could pass on these laws in every community, etc., etc. We're okay so far?
Well, there were scribes too, or
there were probably, yes, there were scribes.
Okay.
There were scribes, and the Mishnah was written down. There were various places where people would go to write. One of those is Bnei Brak. Right? Everybody remember from your Seder, we have the rabbis going into the cave, and they say, rabbis, it's time to come out and say the Shachrit. Right? Yeah.
This is all done in 300 AD, right?
200 CE. We don't use the word AD because it implies Diem is God being the whatever. What's AD?
Anno Domini.
Latin.
Okay, so we're not big into Domini. So that's BCE, before Common Era. Before we don't use the word BC, and it's CE, Common Era. So that's what we use. The Mishnah then gets written down with the straight laws. Okay, put a mezuzah on your door. This is what you should do. When you do the lulav, an etrog, it's chicka-ching, 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 chicka-ching. These are the things that you're supposed to do. It doesn't say that in the Torah, right? It says put these different types of stuff together and shake them, or whatever it is. But the whole procedure of how they would do a lulav, how they would do water libations, Sukkot. There's a story that's told, and I've referred this a couple times, that around Sukkot, what did you want more than anything? It wasn't, let's all go into little huts and so we wanted to have a good winter season, so we would do all these water libations. One year, somewhere in here, where the rabbis or the temple people didn't do the water libation, and there's a story in here of everybody taking their etrogs and pelting and basically showering all of the priests with etrogs, bombing them, and next year, of course, they return. So these are the laws that we have in here. The rabbis had all kinds of concerns and questions about what the law actually meant. Very similar to what do we have? The Declaration of Independence. We have the Constitution. Thank God that we have lawyers, of course. That there are reams and reams and reams of interpretations that are put together, and that began to be looked at in the Talmud. The Talmud contains 2 different types of narrative. One of them is halacha. How should you do things? Anybody see the word in here of halacha? What's the word? Holech. What's holech mean? To go, to walk. How do you go? Remember, always in Hebrew. There is a significant number less of words in Hebrew than there is in English. English is a specific language. When you say something, generally you know what it is. Hebrew has a significantly a number less of words, so we're always trying. Somebody asked me, I used the phrase in my column last week, of neshama as being an inner force. And someone wrote me and said, neshama means soul. You know, where do you get off saying inner force? The way that I interpret neshama, for me, is inner force, right? But because we're so English, we're so literal, but whereas Hebrew is a contextual language. That's why I have 80 or 100 of these books on my shelf, and every one of these 6 divided up into all of these different categories underneath. Each one of them in my office, I have 1 to 4 books that goes through every one of these topics, line by line, page by page. The way that the Talmud is written is that we have halacha. This is the way that we're supposed to do things. The halacha is, come Yom Kippur, what are you supposed to do? Or what are you not supposed to do?
Eat.
Oh, eat what?
Anything.
What else?
Drink.
Anything? Anything? What happens if someone is sick?
Then they can eat.
Oh, where does it say that? What happens if water falls into your mouth? What happens if, God forbid, you forget and you take a bite of something? When should you? The Talmud says that if the amount of a date goes into your mouth, it's okay. Or water, as long as to the filling of your cheek. So there's all these splitting of hairs. It's all of these splitting of hairs because you know what? People wanted to do things correctly. And what happens if you did things wrong?
God would punish you.
God would punish you with sword, pestilence, famine, and starvation. Right? And I'm not joking. This is the way that
Should we take that as a threat?
It was a threat. It was a threat. So in the Talmud, in the Jerusalem or Palestinian Talmud, and there's only a few of these books that are out in this format with English translation. I have 3 of these green ones. Sorry. Okay. All right.
What happened?
Is someone telling us something?
We were punished.
Does that wake them up? So in 300 or 400 CE, the Palestinian or Jerusalem Talmud comes out. All of the arguments, and Rabbi so-and-so remembers it this way, and Rabbi so-and-so remembers it another way, and it's all written,
How come it takes so long for the Babylonian Talmud, or why is it called the Babylonian Talmud in 400?
Okay, so first of all, again, like the Mishnah, there's a mad scramble to get all of these laws.
800 or 900 years from the exile, right?
Right, it's a different Babylonian community. But
Okay.
Okay. So what we have here is we have the Mishnah mad scramble. We have 130 years that finally we've got all the laws down to this handy dandy, and then each one of these is expanded and exploded into something called the Talmud. We'll look at the Talmud in a minute. The the Jerusalem Talmud is as many arguments and discussions that people could think about in the century or 2 after the release of the Mishnah. Okay, now we have a community, a Jewish community in Babylon in 4, 5, 6, 700 CE. Now we can take it easy and we can sit back a little bit and we can put this in some kind of order and start to tell some stories and start to teach some lessons. And we're going to have an argument with Rabbi A and Rabbi B going up against each other even though they didn't live at the same time. But the 2 of them are arguing a point, and one of them rebuts the other. So the Babylonian Talmud is generally, in 95% of the cases, is what we are studying, called the Babli, or the Babylonian Talmud.
Now, was the Babylonian community at that time a really observant, special, learned?
Yeah, very powerful. And of course there was...
More so than anything in Jerusalem.
There was tension between, of course, the scholars that lived in Jerusalem or in Tiberias. In Sipori, has anybody been to Sipori when you're in Israel? Next trip we're actually going to
Tiberias.
Sipori. Yeah. Right. Near Tiberias is a place called Sipori, which is in what we're going to talk about tonight. So, and there is a tension. And by the way, a lot of the rabbis that are referred to in Babylon, in the Babylonian Talmud, don't have the word rabbi in front of their name. They'll be Rav or something else. Rabbi, you could only get if you were downtown, if you were in Jerusalem. So there was a little bit of tension between the two communities on who was, I'm trying to think of an example today, of who would be the official, I can think of Islam, or perhaps, who is the more powerful or influential community. I don't know.
Keeper of the gate.
What's that?
The keeper of the gate.
Right. So we are going to be studying the Babylonian Talmud. The halacha is how to do things. If you're going to fast on Yom Kippur, these are the things that you may do, and these are the things that you can't do, and that's the halacha. That's the way you walk. That's it. Second group of things are called the Agadah, Lahagid, to tell, and those are stories. Some of them are midrashes, some of them are stories, and some of them are rabbis giving you little anecdotes. We're about to read one right away, in just the next few moments, and they teach us some lesson. And they make up, you've heard this, remember on Rosh Hashanah I told the story of how the woman comes to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and says, I want to convert to Judaism. And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob say, I'm sorry, we're not taking customers right now. And she becomes the concubine of one of Esau's sons. And her sons grow up and say, Mom, how can a nice woman like you be a concubine in a tent? And they become Amalek, our horrible enemies. And the rabbis say, why did Amalek come to be? Because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob said no to this woman Timnah at the beginning. Do I think that Timnah actually went door to door and that? But the rabbis are trying to teach us to take in the outsider that one. So this is a perfect example of an agadah, a story that I'm not 100% sure that actually happened, but it teaches us a lesson. Daf Yomi is something that's been instituted in recent years, where people go through a page of Talmud every single day. I think it's a 3-year cycle, if I'm not mistaken. And they go through and they do the entire Talmud, one page per day, until they get to the end. And I believe at the end of the 3 years, they all go to Madison Square Garden and they have a big siyum, a big party. Okay, so I just want to go through this very quickly. Zugot are the partners, the buddies.
Definitely.
So that's Hillel and Shammai and all these dueling rabbis. They exist sort of around the turn of the millennium and before. Tanaim are the people that sort of live around the Mishnah period. Now, by the way, if you quote a Tana, one of the Tanaim, they have more clout than one of the Amorim. The Amorim live around this period of time. So if you quote one of the Tanaim trumps an Amor, and a Zugot trumps, so because they're closer to Mount Sinai and they remember better than everybody else. Okay. Now then we have the Samoraim, which are the reasoners, and then we have the Gionim and the Rishonim, and we are called the Acharonim, the last ones. So I am the very last one. So we have different schools of rabbinical thought that continue to interpret and revisit and rewrite how we interpret the Torah. Sorry, this is a very quick background of the whole Shmir. Okay.
Quick question
Yeah.
on trumping. So if you have the Amoraim trumping everyone else after them, how do you have change?
That's part of the issue. That some of this is subjective. For example, and it sounds silly, but
How do you have women becoming rabbis? How do you have any of that stuff?
well, in this Acharonim, we would argue that there are, and if you look on your chart at the end, it takes us to the year 2000. So if the conservative movement says it's okay for that to be, they are the Acharonim, they are the last of the interpreters. Now,
Right, so there's really nothing that says, for example, something like that, where there's nothing, the Amoraim or the Zugot, that said women couldn't become rabbis. Is that what they're saying?
I don't believe that's the
That
case.
was in there.
What it says in the Talmud, so you know, is that a woman may not read, they may be called to the Torah, but they may not read out of kavod hatzibur, out of respect to the congregation. A woman may not read Torah 1,500 years ago. Who was the congregation? Who was getting embarrassed when women would read?
The men.
The men. Okay. So the conservative movement said, kavod hatzibur, the subjective statement of respect for your congregation, meant something different 1,500 years ago than it does today. The Orthodox may say, look, who are you,
Right.
Mrs. Schreiber, to question this, or Rabbi Huberman? Who are you to you're smarter than the... And we would say, look, Kavod HaTzibur has changed generation to generation. We as conservative and Reform Jews have an obligation to review and see whether subjective conditions have changed. The example I use all the time is if the Talmud says you may not stand on the train tracks between Glen Street and Glen Cove Station because you may get hit by the train, and 50 years from now they stop train service, does that mean that you can't stand on the train tracks anymore? That's part of where New Judaism says, wait a second, that was Babylon, that was those days, but it's not that way now. So are we okay? So the Babylonian Talmud that we are studying dates itself approximately 500 to 700 CE. It expands upon the Mishnah, which is the law. The law was written down 200 CE after the destruction of the temple, and somehow is meant to reflect the oral tradition, which says the classic Jewish tradition comes directly from Mount Sinai, and that's where we start today. Everybody up to date? Anybody have any questions about that? Okay, I know a lot of you have been through this a few times before. Yeah.
No, you know what?
But
It's
when you say that men might be offended by it, the more proper term is aroused. The women's voices arouse them.
So again, you know what? All it says is, see, here's where we get into interpretation. If we went around the table and I said, a woman may not read because of kavod hatzibur, kavod, respect of the tzibur, of the congregation, we could all go around the table and you could say it's arousing. We could say it's embarrassing. The men would go off fishing, hunting, warmongering, whatever they were doing. And the women who didn't have careers, there's many, many interpretations. And we've had this discussion before. But let's just say that respect for the congregation changes. And I just want to mention one thing. You'll notice that when we can't find the Torah reading up on the bima, I say to Bill, continue off the sheet of paper. Because one of the other things it says is, do not make the congregation wait while you roll the Torah. It's disrespectful to the congregation. So if they can't find the Torah reading after like 90 seconds, I say read it. Just read it off the sheet of paper. It's disrespectful to the congregation and erodes confidence that we actually know what we're doing, which we do 98% of the time. Okay, so we got the chain from Mount Sinai, oral, written down, and the Mishnah after the destruction of the temple. A first attempt to do a discussion, and now we're into the discussion periods. All of the comments along the side of the Talmud, which I will show you right now. You'll see the middle block. If you want to just pass that around, there's the middle block, which is the commentary, and all around the edges are Saboraim, Gionim, Rishonim, commentators such as Rashi and all these other wise people who are trying to explain to us so the interpretation continues and continues and continues. But unfortunately, at about the year, maybe 700-800 years ago, they closed the book and said nobody else gets in. You'll have to, the official version of this is sealed, and you have to find yourself a good rabbi or a good commentator that will continue this discussion as we do here. And we are part of this ongoing discussion. And the movement that we belong to, called the conservative movement, meets every year a couple times and says, is it okay? Is veal kosher? Okay, if they say that veal is not kosher because it violates animal kindness, then veal is not kosher. We have the right, based on movements and your rabbi, to continue to extend this discussion. And you tell me, whether you think I'm on the mark or not. And supposedly rabbis are supposed to keep in tune with the people. Let's go to the text. So what I wanted to do is we're going to do 2 sections of the Talmud today. And I'd like to go to, I have a little section on Judah the Prince here if you want to read it. We're going to read about Judah the Prince's final hours a little bit later. But these are 2 stories, 2 agadot, 2 stories that I'm going to share with you. We're going to go to page, to the Talmud page, and let's see if I can, it's about, how many pages in? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in.
29B1.
29b1 it is. We are now going to go to, and we're going to go through approximately 10 or maybe even a dozen of the most famous stories in the Talmud. Now, what we have here is a discussion. When does Moses, let's take a guess here, when does Moses live about? Moses lived, take a guess. He lived somewhere in here, okay? Somewhere in this vicinity, right? The Torah is given approximately 3,488 years ago. He doesn't make it into the Promised Land, so he definitely doesn't make it. Let's say that let's take off 40 years off of there, and that's really where we lose Moses. Rabbi Akiva, and I think you have it in the previous page. Somebody just turn it around. When does Rabbi Akiva live?
17.
CA is circa. Circa.
17 to
137 CE.
Okay, so he's somewhere. Where are we? So he's somewhere. So where would we put him? By the way, is he? Let's see if we can remember this. Is he a? He's not a zook. He's not like a one of the buddies. Is he? This is a hard question, but see if
It's
it's
not a hard question, but the answer is right here.
Oh, is he one of the Tanaim or is he an Amor? A Tana, right? Because we're going to place him before 200 CE, right? He's one of the people that participates and helps to articulate the law. The story on him doesn't say there. He doesn't begin. Let us all be so blessed. He doesn't start to study Torah until he's how old? Say that? He's in his 40s. Okay, he has a wonderful wife that supports him in his studies away from home. And he becomes one of our great scholars. I think that he's titled there as one of the greatest
Where are we now?
Rosh HaChachamim. Just Rabbi Akiva, very quick, 1-paragraph biography. He is known as the Rosh, the head, the top. Again, another example of how the word Rosh, the Rosh means your head, Rosh means the head of, right? Rosh HaChachamim. Chachamim means the sages. He's the king of the sages. Okay, so let's see what happens now. And we're talking about now Menachot. You notice on the top of the page where the 2 little arrows are. This comes from the tract of the Talmud. This is a sidebar. It's a tract of the Talmud called Menachos, or Menachot in Hebrew. And it means I think it means seeds. Or planting. It's something having to do with that. So what happens is that there's a sidebar here, and they get into a discussion about why we have little crowns on top of the Torah. Flip your page over 1, and you'll see, if you've never looked at the Torah that closely, no matter what your Hebrew knowledge is, you can see on top of the words. This is just a photocopy of a piece of Torah. What do you notice on top of the letters? Little crowns, little tagim, tags, basically. And there's a whole ritual of why certain letters have the tags and the crowns, and that's a whole Kabbalistic thing which we won't get into today. But there's a discussion of why certain letters have tags and certain don't, and blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden we get into a sidebar. And let's start to read this sidebar. First tract of the Talmud. Who wants to read this? And what we ask you to do is you don't have to read the Hebrew. And the bold is a translation of the actual Aramaic or Hebrew. And the lighter letters are is the commentator just giving us a little extra background. So the Gemara is another term for Talmud. Okay? The Talmud turns to the topic of tagim, or as I say, tags, beginning with an agadic. Everybody remember agadic? It's an adjective. Narrative. Who wants to go?
Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, when Moses ascended to the holy heights, he found the Holy One, blessed is he, as he was sitting and attaching crowns to some of the letters. That is, although the Torah was completely written, he was
Everybody,
still...
hang on, let's wait till... Okay, keep going.
He was still adding tagim to certain letters. Moses said before him, Master of the universe, who is holding you back from giving the Torah as it is? God said to him, there is one man who is destined to exist at the end of many generations. Akiva ben Yosef is his name, and it is he who will expound upon each and every point. Heaps and heaps of halachot.
Halachos means that's the Yiddish translation for halachot, laws. Rabbi Akiva is going to tell us, by the way, when is this supposedly taking place? Let's go back. This is taking place 34 centuries ago. And God is now time traveling. God is actually going forward and saying to Moses, hey, by the way, I'm attaching little tags on top, and Moses says, I don't get what you're doing. He says, well, you're going to have to check out Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so keep going.
In 3,000 years.
Yeah, sorry.
Moses said before God, Master of the universe, show him to me. God said to him, turn around and see what is behind you.
Okay, so let's picture Moses. Moses now, this is a movie, right? This is the Twilight Zone or something, right? So Moses turns around, and where is he? In the cave. Okay, he has now time traveled 1,400 or 1,500 years, says the Talmud. This is an Agadah, it's a story, okay? Let's see what it's trying to teach us.
He found himself in Rabbi Akiva's class. Moses went and sat at the end of 8 rows of students.
Stop. Tell me something. Who sits in the front? How many of you sat in the front in high school? David, how many sat in the back?
Everyone. Everyone but Schreiber, he said.
Why did you sit in the back?
You want to be seen or called on.
Or that you weren't the teacher's. What's that?
Wouldn't be picked.
You wouldn't be picked upon, or you didn't want to be picked upon. In other words, where does Moses gets jettisoned 1,500 years forward into the classroom? There's 8 rows, okay, and you're right. Certain people are sitting in the front going ooh ooh ooh, and all of us. Why were we all those people? We're sitting in the back row. And by the way that it works in a yeshiva is that you work your way up to the front as you gain in respect and wisdom. Where's Moses? He's like and by the way, I think it actually says exactly where he was. Go ahead, keep going.
At the end of 8 rows. But as he listened to the give and take between Rabbi Akiva and his students, he did not understand what they were saying.
Hold it. This is Moses. Wait a minute. This is Moses. He just spent 40 days on the mountains discussing Torah with God. He wrote it down. He had his laptop. He wrote the entire Torah down. And he's listening to the Torah being discussed by Rabbi Akiva. And what does he understand? Bupkis.
Disheartened, Moses' strength ebbed. However, once they reached a certain matter that required a source, Rabbi Akiva's students asked him, Teacher, from where do you know this? And Rabbi Akiva replied to them, it is a halacha transmitted orally to Moses at Sinai. Upon hearing this, Moses' mind was relieved. He returned and came before the Holy One, blessed is he. Moses said before him, Master of the universe, you have someone like this, and you give the Torah through me? Give it through Rabbi Akiva. God said to him, quiet. Thus has it...
By the way, what's it say in Hebrew? Can somebody read that for me?
Sheket.
Shtok.
Sheket.
Sheket. Shtok. Be quiet. Everybody remember that from Hebrew school? Sheket. Be quiet.
Sheket b'vakasha.
B'vakasha. Shtok. Tishtaku means basically shut up. That's basically quiet. Okay.
David.
Okay, hang on.
Thus it is arisen in the thoughts before me. This is part of my greater plan to which you are not privy. Moses said before him, Master of the universe, you have shown me his Torah. Now show me his reward.
Stop there. Let's pick. What just happened? What just happened? What is this? What is this section trying to teach us about the Torah, right? But Torah. Let's go back to the scenario. This is Moses. The Torah says there never was a prophet like Moses again. If Moses doesn't get this, we're all in trouble, right? He goes ahead. He's sitting in the back row, where by the who knows what, by the back door, by the hallway, doesn't understand a single thing that's going on. Is depressed, and he hears. What does he hear? What does he hear? One of the teachers says, "Where do you get off on teaching this section, Rabbi Akiva?" Rabbi Akiva answers,
It was given to Moses.
This is Moses' law. This is Moses' law. Moses says, huh? What? What is this section? Let's just think about this for a second. What is this section teaching us? And this is why it's actually one of the most famous lines in the Torah. Let your imagination go with this.
First, that it changes because he didn't understand the original, so obviously there had to be changes, and that was okay if God was showing this to him.
Or wide variance in what it says.
What's that?
There is a wide variance in what you're being told.
Okay. Yeah.
Except that at core, it's the word that was handed to Moses.
Right.
So also the classic interpretation of Torah was given to the people. It is not for you to tell us about. We here on earth will read it and decide. And it means that over the years, over the generations, it changes.
The words are the same. The crowns, the tags are the same. But the Torah today is not the same. Are you allowed to use? What would happen if I would have pulled out a guitar in the middle of Rabbi Akiva's Friday night class? What would happen? What would happen if? Let's think of an example. There was a big halachic dispute when the Israeli astronaut was going around the Earth. Remember how many should he say shachri every
10 minutes.
every 10 minutes? Every day the world changes, and Moses was not able to figure out. The words were the same, but the world had changed, but the Torah was still there. Mm-hmm. And if we were to take Rabbi Akiva forward to Maimonides 1,200 years later, or put him in the middle of Crown Heights, or in the middle of our service, would Rabbi Akiva not been in the same position? So this is one of the wise sections of the Torah, which actually says to us, the Torah's words remain the same, but those little crowns on top of the Torah encourage us to soar and to take the Torah and to adapt it to new.
You know, but it's interesting. But in some ways, this flies in the face of ultra-orthodoxy, who don't really want to change.
Hold that thought for a second.
I have another comment though, because I read ahead a little.
Okay.
And
Wait, don't go ahead yet, because.
but it connects.
Okay.
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Let's go to the end of this section, because it has. I wish. By the way I usually tell this to the kids is that, and Moses goes back and says, "Boy, oh boy, isn't it heartening to know that my Torah still is relevant 1,500 years later?" And everybody, and they have a wonderful story about how the words remain the same, but the world has advanced and has turned many times over since then.
But I think what's even more important is the idea that even though Moses came forward and he didn't understand, Master of the Universe says that this is part of my grand plan that you're really not privy to. but this is my greater plan to which you're not privy. And then that's at the end, he doesn't understand what happened to Rabbi Akiva, who's such a great rabbi, and why he got to, be the greatest teacher, and yet his end was so horrific. And he said, well, why? This is what you get for studying Torah. But the answer was, this is part of my greater plan to which you are not privy. So, what are the rabbis trying to tell us? Are we allowed to change? Are we allowed to change this, or change the interpretation? And who are we to do it?
So,
because
So you connected
The grand
it
plan.
with the great plan.
by the way, let's finish up the section. Just go a little further, and we'll just.
Well, when is this written, and by whom?
Good question. So this is written. This is redacted somewhere in this period here. So the question that you ask, we can take this on a number of levels, right? We're living in Babylon. Do you have the right to change the Torah? Should you change the Torah? What happens if you change the Torah? This is why we study Talmud, right? This is what is God's plan, and we'll get to this in a minute. Would somebody read the end of this, just how it ends?
I have a question on language here.
Yeah.
Master of the universe, you have shown me his Torah. Who is his?
Yeah, that's. I think it's Akiva's.
It's Akiva's Torah.
That is confusing.
It's Akiva's Torah. And guess what? I'm going to give you a very, very progressive view. And Mori Helitzer has his Torah. Moshe Helitzer has his Torah. And we have, each one of us has a slight variation on how we read Torah. Not the Torah, right? But Torah. How each one of you, the way that you raise your children, I would say to you, would be slightly different, with a slightly different emphasis, because that's your Torah.
So we personalize it.
I believe, I'm giving you my interpretation. I think that each of us interpret, my Torah is slightly different than your Torah. I know your Torah, and by the way, I know everybody's Torah reasonably well, and it's wonderfully, subtly different, and each one precious, and each one a subtle change. The Torah changes to a certain extent. You're looking a little bit more historiographical.
But you can't now make that the law, and you can't make that the interpretation, because that is the interpretation of either a single individual, a group of individuals at a specific point in time.
Right, but this is not halacha. This is a story. And it's meant to generate discussion about the nature of Torah, I would put to you. This is an agadah. This is not a halacha. There's no law here. There's no law. Somebody read the end of this. I want to. Malka, or whoever wants to take it from me. Just read the end of it. What happens to Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva is Mr. Cool, right? At the beginning of this, he's the guy, Rosh, the head of the sages, the person that's the greatest sage of all time, just about next to who? Next to Moses. What happens to him? Just want to finish this off. Show me, turn around and see what's behind you. Moses turns around again, taps his toes 3 times, and what happens? What happens? Read it, top of the right-hand column. Turn around and see what's behind you.
Turn around and see what's behind you. Moses turned around and saw that people were weighing the flesh from Rabbi Akiva's body in the butcher's meat market in order to sell it. Moses said before him, Master of the universe, this is Torah, and this is its reward. God said to him, quiet. This is part of my greater plan to which you are not privy.
I'm not going to give you the. Let's try to figure this one out. There's no. Anybody want to speculate what's going on here?
But, this is also what the Orthodox will say, it's not for us to understand.
Right.
It's God's will.
By the way, what are we referring to? What happens to Rabbi Akiva? Anybody know the story of what happens with Rabbi Akiva?
Well, it tells us right now.
It's torture.
Right. He's many of the rabbis during Roman times, where we read about it on Yom Kippur, right, were speared or sieved, and Rabbi Akiva was combed to death. And what's the last thing he does before he dies? He says the Shema. That's why when someone is on their, that's the last word by extension, the last word that we're supposed to say after we go. A lot of the times when someone is on their final, even when they're unconscious and there's a family around and they're 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm not there, I say, if you're there, just hold hands around the person and say the Shema. It's comforting for the family, and it meets at some level what Rabbi Akiva is example. So what happens to him is he gets combed to death, and the Romans basically make meat out of him, literally, and they're selling him in the market. Anybody want to make a connection between Moses and Rabbi Akiva and their ultimate end? Think for a second.
And each one's ultimate end?
Yeah.
Moses died quietly with God kissing his lips.
Okay.
And Akiva was tortured to death.
Okay. Moses doesn't
Suffer.
But Moses ends his life not getting what he wants. Like he doesn't.
Right, he doesn't get to go to the promised land.
He doesn't get to go to the
But
promised.
that's not, I mean, that's awful, but you know what? My heart doesn't break for him. Look what happened to Akiva. I mean, that kind of suffering is,
Yeah, but we don't know that.
what don't we know?
We don't know that suffering is any worse than Moses not getting to the promised land.
Yeah, what he says, well, Moses is supposedly asking, I cheated by looking at the end, and it says, this is Torah, and this is his reward?
Right.
Question mark?
Right.
So where do we go from there?
Okay. So I read some of the commentaries. There's open ends here. So all of these guys, let's say from here on in, start to weigh in some of the latter commentators. I'll give you some of them that I read on this. Rashi says, or some of the commentators say, you know what? We don't deify any human being. Torah is above all human beings. And just when we think that we create someone who is high and mighty, we're not a people who worship, and this is, by the way, possibly a polemic against a Jesus type of figure that may have been growing. I mean, we're speculating here. We don't know, but we have various commentators. And somebody also said that it's in our youth is the time that we move Torah forward. We're revolutionaries. We come up with all these new interpretations. It's our kids that push us to. I'm adding music or having minions in our basement. And then when we get a little older, we sort of we go by the wayside, and a new generation of revolutionaries come in and push Torah forward. And perhaps that's what the Tagim are, it's just to remind us that it's the younger, because when you get older, God dispenses with you, and you either don't make it to the promised land, or literally you're on a hook in a marketplace. I'm just giving you some of the commentary. Yeah.
It almost seems like there are two separate stories here. One, and it's beautiful, with the Tagim and the that I can't think of the word, that it's continuously growing and changing. The other one is that, to me, the whole answer to theophany, why do bad things happen to good people? And I've heard this in terms of the Holocaust. Don't question. And I make an analogy because the way Akiva died was absolutely horrendous. And that I find very, very troubling. This is part of my great, and I have heard that in response to the Holocaust. And like Sandy says, Orthodox will say someone died, it's a tragedy. No, we're not to question God's plan. And yet...
I've never heard of rationalization about the Shoah.
Oh, I have. I have. It's not ours to question. So that is very, very, very troubling to me. Very, very troubling.
So if we were studying this for long periods of time, if I were to divide you up into twos for a half hour, an hour before I got here, then there'd be a lot of conversations here. Is Torah for the young? Do we not worship the people? By the way, Rabbi Akiva dies in way a spiritual hero. He says, I never thought, when it says, you shall love the Lord with all your heart and all your... I didn't know whether in my last moment, when the flames are just about to, whether I would actually be able to live that and do that. And he's able to do that, and he says, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, and he dies. And I would say to you that that's in a way noble, just like Moses dies. What happens to the body after? We don't worship Moses' body after that. We don't know where he's buried. And Akiva's body is basically turned into chopped liver, so to speak. So no. I'm sorry, but there are parallels between the two, in a way that they die in spiritual dignity, but their bodies were not that. I'm just saying that this
wasn't it like historically at that time there were gods and deified people and kings that were considered themselves gods and all those things. So it was kind of like counter.
So interpret that passage. To interpret that passage in the fact that we don't, even though he is the greatest, Rabbi Akiva, what's God's plan? You are just a human being, and we're going to do and we're even going to do an exaggerated story here, just to remind you, you're just flesh. You're just flesh, and once your time is up, your time is up.
Dust in the wind.
Yeah.
The other statement, this is really jam-packed.
Yeah.
This is Torah, and this is its reward. And God says, be quiet. To me, that's interesting because we're not doing Torah because we expect a reward. We're not. It really comes back to bad things happen. Just because I lead a good life, when I say that I follow the laws, I try to be a good person, I do justice, love mercy, walk humbly before, doesn't mean that bad things are not going to happen to me. That we do Torah because Torah is the reward. It doesn't guarantee that bad things are not going to happen.
It does guarantee death, though, doesn't it?
That everybody's guaranteed that.
Malka, before you say what you're going to say, I want to remind you all of something. We are not a biblical religion. We are a rabbinical religion. That's what I'm trying to say to you, is right from this point, where the Zugot, right, the rabbis are debating in twos, and then we have the rabbis here, and the Amorim, Moreh, teacher, and then we have the reasoners, and then we have all these people. We are constantly being interpreted. The rabbis wrote this story. I may be wrong here, but I'm not sure that Moses actually time traveled into the 8th row of Rabbi Akiva. But the rabbis are trying to teach us something, and let's try to just before we go to the next one, what are they trying to teach us? Just use your imagination. And there's no right answer, or there's no wrong answer. What are they trying to teach us?
God's got a plan.
God's got a plan. Number 2.
There's an interesting footnote here.
Yep.
Quite, a person is not allowed to explore intellectually that which he is constitutionally incapable of understanding. That's why God tells Moses to be quiet, because there's no way you can understand.
You think you understand the beginning of time and the end of time? You
Yeah.
ever tried to figure that one out?
Yeah.
You get yourself, you go.
Yeah.
And by the way, this interpretation, although it's the most complete, is a lot of the times a very ultra-orthodox interpretation. So,
Are there more, when you say orthodox, are there more?
There are other ones.
What is it, the Stein, what's the new one?
This is
Steinsaltz
Schottenstein. There's about 5 or 6 different interpretations of this. Let me also say the biggest one is Torah changes from generation to generation. That the letters remain the same, but the circumstances of Torah and the world change, and how Torah intersects with mankind generation to generation changes. Moses can't figure out, the Torah has no relevancy to him 1,500 years later, just as if he was jettisoned in the middle of Times Square, do you think that he would have any clue what he was watching at the time?
Why did they put that?
So
I
what?
get that,
The
but
ending?
it still bothers me, that ending. Because one is a beautiful little story that I can tell children, the other one is like...
I usually don't tell this
No,
ending.
I said, I know. But so why was that put on?
Before we move on, what do you think? And I don't have an answer. I mean, I have a speculative answer. But what do you think that the reason that this little
He leads us to Islam, submission. No.
Say that again?
He's telling you you're living in a very dangerous world, and you better be ready for anything that comes.
You have
Look
no
at Israel.
You have no
Look at
control.
where
It
Israel
doesn't
is.
matter.
It is all written. It doesn't matter what you say or what you do. This is the plan, and you're not privy to the plan.
So you're right. So
He says.
you don't know. God has a plan, and whatever it is, enjoy the ride, so to speak. But Torah will move with you. That's one interpretation.
And then so you have to take it in a broader context of what happens in the whole world. And there were many things being said here today that I had wanted to talk to you about afterward, which is why I came about the other evening. And
Which was wonderful, by the way. You did a great job.
thank you very much. But if you think about that, and what you're now saying, what is the basic tenets of Islam? Submission.
That's what it means.
That's what it means.
And what I was going to say is one of the most disturbing things to me about God's telling Moses to be quiet is that it's so antithetical to the whole basis of what we do, what Jews do, which is to question and to argue and to find out why. So it's very odd to me that they would have done this. So
Wait, there's a machloket here. On one side, we're being taught that Torah changes, and you need to change Torah to adapt to different centuries and different times. He's basically saying, Moses, Mr. Wise Guy, you think Akiva knows what he's talking about, and the 7 rows in front of you know what they're talking about. You're clueless. The world has changed. The Torah adapts. But
what I was going to say is what was going on when they wrote this also. Because we need to know that before we can actually even answer your question.
But it was a very violent world at that time anyways. People used to be put on stakes and hung up. I studied this
But
in
at least we would
archaeology.
have a better
You
idea
can't understand
of what the whole point of this story was at that time.
So I'm going to tell you that I think the classic version of this is Torah changes and we don't worship human beings, and that you pass the mantle of the letters of the Torah to the next generation, and once your time is up and you've reached your prime, you basically fade.
And so basically he's saying, I mean, what the rabbis were saying at that point, the ones who were writing this, was basically Moses doesn't count anymore, in a sense. In a sense. He doesn't matter specifically at the moment because we're going on with it.
What does he learn? Well, how is he comforted? He goes into the classroom and he is, what's the phrase that's used? He's dejected, or what's
Finding his mind was relieved.
But at the beginning it says that he was depressed, or his strength ebbed. In other words, and then someone says,
because somebody said that this is Moses' law. I mean, this is what was given to Moses.
and Moses says, oh, and he's comforted, and he goes back in time travel to the beginning. We'll finish 1 or 2 more comments, and we'll go to the next
You know, there's another way of looking at it. When God's plan is not necessarily, I have a plan, and I know exactly how everything's going to change. His plan could be, it will change over time. You know, so it's not necessarily, this is it, and you can deviate.
Don't assume that
Right.
your little slice of time
Right.
is the be-all, end-all.
Right.
I got the big.
Right.
What's another word for God? Ein sof. Ein. There is no sof end. There's no end. So there's like an image that they show you of God. Is like, here's the world. We're down here in the parking lot, and God is up here, and and it goes from many years before this world ever came to be, and will be at the end. And you don't know how it all fits together. Shut up if you think that you know that your little slice of time is the.
Well, that's it. He's saying basically you're not here, and your time has been important, but we are going on now. We're moving onward, and so we can't discuss what you were is no longer, but something better or different maybe happened.
For that part I get, I just don't understand why that last part was put in.
This was written in Babylon, right?
Babylon, it was redacted. Now, by the way, this story, let me just, before you ask the question, this story was either made during this period of time or as a reflection or a redaction, an editing of a story that may have been told through the oral tradition back a little further into Akiva's time.
Babylon was Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was the beginning of city-states. Every little city-state had a different god. So maybe the story is showing about the overwhelming power of God, and we who are humans have very little significance in his power, because around them, every city-state had a different god at that time.
Very good. All right, let's move on. That's very good.
Which fits in with not deifying Moses.
Or Akiva, for that matter. Right? Because Akiva, by the way, Akiva can't trump Moses. And you're right, Akiva's ending is a lot less dignified than Moses. Moses has to win in the end.
But Akiva kept the faith. He went out a hero.
He did.
Given what he was going through.
But just in case we're prone to deify him, and we're told at the end it comes to.
Or
let's go to the next one.
Aspect of this is God is using people and never giving them reward and actually abusing them. There is a book which I haven't read, which I have on my list among 1,000 others, and this is by a guy by the name of Bleck, who's a rabbi who taught at the yeshiva. He said, if God is so good, why is the world so bad?
That's the theophany.
I'm going back to, this is a rabbinical story. The rabbis are trying to teach us something, and supposedly inspired by God. Let's continue to the next one. This is a medical one. And we're going to go back to our friend. We're going to go to 103B8. Oh, sorry, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm getting over it. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. This comes from the tractate. Let's see if somebody can translate this for me. Over on the right-hand side, Kasubos. Kasubos. Let's take the S's out and put the Ketubah. Yeah, it comes from the whole section. There's by the way, there's 3 volumes. Yeah, there's 3 volumes of this in my library, just on Ketubahs. Okay, on marriage contracts. Okay. So now we have a story. We're going to go back to our friend Yehuda HaNasi. Everybody remember him?
No.
Yehuda HaNasi. He is the redactor of the Mishnah of the Law, 200 CE. So soon after, does anybody have a very quick biography before we go to? Where is he? Somewhere in here. There's right at the beginning.
Yeah.
So he dies. He dies either 15 Kislev in 188 CE or 219 CE, and I'm just not sure. We don't know because the New York Times was there at the time. So now this is a story about his death. He's a great scholar. We owe a lot to him, but there is a message here, and this actually formulates, by the time you're finished reading it, how we deal with end-of-life decisions for what's it called? Medical ethics, meant to this day. This is so. If somebody want to read this, and this is 103 B6. I've given you a little extra information because there's some places mentioned in this, and I just wanted to show you where they are because these places actually exist today. But the Gemara cites another baraisa. A baraisa is a body of law or writings which isn't always quoted directly or didn't make it into the final edition, but they're in another book somewhere else or in some other famous law book. And so you can always quote that, and that gives you like a trump that's an important thing. So the Gemara cites another baraisa concerning the death of Rebbe. Okay, so that's what they called Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. So now we're talking about 1,800 years ago, give or take. Okay, somebody want to do this? Credit?
The Gemara now returns to the Baraisa that details Rebbe's final commands. The Baraisa continues.
Go to 106, 103 B6.
I'm there, over here, okay, the Gemara, okay, I got it.
Oh, sorry, no, wait, I'm sorry.
That's my baby.
I'm sorry.
There's a line here, so.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
yeah, I know, I think you want to see where the arrow is?
Yes,
where the
there.
arrow is.
Wait a
Okay.
second. Yeah, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
That's the
So
idea.
this is 103B6.
That's the Talmud.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
The Gemara cites another Baraisa concerning the death of Rebbe. It has been taught in a Baraisa. Rebbe was lying on his sickbed in Zippori.
Where's Zippori again? It's in Tiberias. And by the way, if you look on the back page, there's a wonderful. Has anybody ever seen in your travels through Israel the Mona Lisa of the North? This is the place where this was written. There's a beautiful picture. This is the Mona Lisa of the North.
I was there.
Yeah, have you seen her? It's a beautiful. There she is. And this is a mosaic that sits on the floor of Zippori. Okay, so I just photocopied it so you know this is a real place that exists. Okay, keep going.
And a burial place was prepared for him in Beis Sherim. The Gemara asks, but it has been taught in another Baraisa that when the verse states, righteousness shall you pursue, it teaches that one should go after Rebbe to Beis Sherim to have his case adjudicated. We see that Rebbe was in Beis Sherim. Why then would his sickbed be in Zippori?
So let me try to translate that. Everybody knows about justice
Yes.
shall you pursue.
Yes.
If you think that he's the justice, then wherever the Rebbe happens to be, that's where you're going to take his case. And if Beit She'arim is where he would go, and that's where his yeshiva probably was, around Tiberias, the question is why are we... There's a discussion about Zippori. That's not what we're interested in, but that's what they're talking about. Keep going, turn the page.
The Gemara answers, indeed, Rebbe was generally found in Beis Sherim, but when he was taken ill, they brought him to Zippori.
Okay.
For it is lofty, therefore the air there is sweet.
Okay.
The Gemara tells us what transpired on the day Rebbe died.
Flip over 104A. We flip the page.
On that day that Rebbe died, the rabbis, because of his illness, decreed a public fast and begged for heavenly mercy. And they said, whoever shall say that Rebbe has died shall be pierced with a sword.
Uh-oh.
The maidservant of Rebbe ascended to the roof and said, those above, i.e. the angels, seek to take Rebbe, and those below, i.e. Israel, seek to keep Rebbe. May it be his will that those below overcome those above, i.e. that Rebbe lived. Once she saw that Rebbe entered the latrine many times because of his stomach ailment, and that each time he used tefillin and replaced his tefillin, and that he therefore suffered greatly, she said, may it be his will that those above overcome those below, i.e. that Rebbe died. But the rabbis did not cease to pray for mercy, so she took a small earthenware vessel and threw it from the roof to the ground.
Let's just stop there for a second. So let's paint the scene here. Right? Rebbe, he has got, dysentery or something. He's in bad shape. And he would wear his tefillin constantly. He's crawling to the outhouse. And of course, you don't take your tefillin with you into the outhouse because it's got holy words in it. So the poor man is crawling and he takes off his tefillin, he puts back his tefillin. Outside, people are going outside let the Rebbe live, and whoever decides that he's going to die, we're going to put him, live, Rebbe, live, Rebbe. And the poor guy is schlepping it over to the latrine. And what does she do? His nursemaid or his maidservant or his nurse, what does she do?
She breaks the vessel.
She goes, I'm not sure, the way that the story was taught.
Distraction.
Right. She basically takes a vessel, a vase, and she pegs it, she throws it as far as she can, and...
From the roof to the ground.
Yeah. So she goes up onto the roof, and basically does a Johann Santana, and throws this as far as she can. What happens? Crash. Okay, everybody's davening outside. Whoa. Okay, what happens now?
When the rabbis heard the sound of the breaking vessel, they ceased momentarily to pray for mercy, and Rebbe died. The rabbi said to Bar Kapara, go investigate Rebbe's condition. He went and discovered that Rebbe had died. He tore his garment in mourning and shifted its tear to his back so that the rabbis would not immediately realize what had occurred.
So what happens when somebody dies, right? We rend, what's it called? We rend our clothing, but he doesn't want to get pierced with the thing, so he turns his garment backwards so that the cut in the clothing is basically backside. Okay.
He returned to them, and he opened by stating the following words of eulogy. The angels and the righteous ones took hold of the holy ark, i.e. Rebbe, and contended for it. The angels have vanquished the righteous ones, and the holy ark is captured. The rabbi said to Bar Kapara, as Rebbe then died, he said to them, you said it, and I did not say it.
So the angels came and took him, right? The angels did it, okay? And basically, now, but there is a an ethical principle here which forms the basis of actually Jewish medical ethics to this day. And I think Rabbi Mann referred to it briefly, but he never really directly, I tried to lead him into it, but he didn't bite. So I wanted to just do this one because it's in the same epoch that we've been talking about. This is the end of Rabbi, but what's the principle?
There's a time to live and a time to die.
And?
Don't listen to the rabbi, listen to the nurse.
And don't prolong suffering. So the inevitable.
This is how we interpret it today. Remember when I was first here, the first year, Rabbi Schartzer was here. And he's an expert, he's a conservative rabbi, former plastic surgeon that moved into rabbinics when he was about 45 years old. And he's an expert in this field. And he said, this teaches us, this is the proof text. Do not artificially prolong someone's suffering for your own comfort. Benefit. It's time to go. By the way, the second one is that there's somebody that's dying, and outside somebody is sawing wood, and you sort of get into that, and the person's in bed, and they're basically on, and there was something very, very comforting about that rhythm of the sawing. And somebody I'm paraphrasing because I'm being paid, so I'm doing a little extra, but somebody says, would you stop doing that? And basically the sawing stops and the person departs this world. Sometimes we actually have to make a break from our loved ones and let them go. And so this is actually the proof text for Jewish law on, are you allowed to, do you keep somebody going indefinitely? And you're allowed to deny somebody treatment. There is an issue if you take out, for example, an intravenous or whatever it is, and by putting it back in, you would be prolonging their life artificially, so you actually just keep it withdrawn. There's a big debate about this amongst the two schools, of course, in Judaism. But do you do Herculean efforts to keep somebody ticking, so to speak, and suffering, or do you sort of withdraw and let them go to the angels, so to speak? So these are, and I think this is pretty straightforward, unless anybody has any.
But that's also why we have now
Health proxies.
health proxies.
Living well.
Right. But I think that many times, not all the time, people fill out health proxies. So rabbis are called upon often to say, what should we do? And generally, I look into the eyes of whoever I happen to be, and I make an assessment of whether it's time yet. But generally the principle is don't. The poor guy is trying to stay alive, and he's sitting there winding his tefillin back and forth and in and out of the outhouse. And it's actually the nurse, and you are right, it is the nurse that teaches us the lesson about the proper way to
But how do you justify all these medical, so-called miracles that they could perform today when somebody's sick? That you're saying that you shouldn't do this?
Don't prolong suffering. Because there is the Rebbe, and he's clearly suffering. He's got, and he's trying to keep everybody outside happy, because he hears probably the davening that's going on outside. Yeah.
I'll share this.
Which is
I'll share this with everyone. And my son ends up saying, "You're not extending life. You're just prolonging the length of time it takes you to die."
Right. So whenever we're looking at these issues, and let's face it, we're all going to, if we haven't already, this is the comfort text, so to speak. That
When my time comes, don't rush it.
Put that in writing.
Everybody hear that?
And by the way,
Can we tell you when your time is up, David?
yeah. So
Okay.
So the thing I want to leave you with, because it's 9 o'clock, the thing I want to leave you with is that there is something on the ark of our the Holy Ark at the yeshiva, the seminary, and it says this: Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. These words and these words are the words of the living God. So the reason I'm mentioning this, and I say this a lot, my parents, God bless them, they're both 86, and my mother says, don't do anything out of the ordinary, like, don't do anything heroic to save me. When it's my time, let me go in peace. My father is like you. He says, as long as we have technology, as long as Hashem has given us the ability to prolong life, every breath is sacred. Do everything possible in your power to prolong every single. Who are you to play with God? And I have one, and I have the other, and who is right and who is wrong?
They're both right.
Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim.
The important thing is that people are able to make their own choices, and I
Right.
think that's
So we go back to the beginning. We go back to the first reading. The Torah changes, and now that we have the technology to keep people going, in some cases, well, look at Ariel Sharon. I mean, we can keep people going indefinitely for
How long has he been
for so long that this is a living document, and the document continues to be filtered through. Ultimately, the Acharonim are the last ones. We are the latest, the last ones. It's our obligation through studies such as this and through the conservative law society. And by the way, Orthodox does change. It just changes a little slower than Reform, which is and conservative is halfway, and Orthodox is very slow, and in some cases is going in the other direction. Okay, so that's it for tonight. So every week we'll do one or two of these greatest hits of these famous. Yeah, if you wanted. Yeah, I won't. I'm going to take what's left. I did 20 of these. So if somebody joins us last week, I'm going to try to do a review of this very, very quickly. But you get how we got here. You get the evolution. So that's the. Thank you.